Welcome to the KINGSBEAT podcast. I am James Hammy, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. We're joining you live on this Memorial Day Monday. And of course, joining me is Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, how are you?
What's going on? I debated putting myself together a little bit more for the pod, but figured I'm out near Lake Havasu and I just go full authentic.
Yeah,
This is how we're living on Memorial Day, so I thought I'd embrace it for the pod.
the gun show is out.
I guess so.
Welcome to
I
the
need a
gun
little bit
show.
of color. I'm blinding people out here, so.
Well, I have a problem with that myself, Brenden. Sean is, of course, away for the weekend. He went to Bottle Rock, and he's hanging out, doing whatever he's doing. So welcome into the show. We are, of course, a Blue Wire podcast brought to you by Prize Picks. I debated on going live or not. Clearly, the Insiders is off today. And wherever Brenden works, they are also off today. So we decided a live show would actually work with so many people like still needing sort of their fix. But I want to start the show with some really sad news that we just learned. Maybe, I don't know, half hour ago. The great Bill Walton has passed away at the age of 71 after a prolonged battle with cancer. Um, I don't know about you, Brenden, but like I grew up with Bill Walton as like a commentator, as the crazy guy yelling "throw down, big man," and especially during the golden age of the Kings, he was live at a lot of those shows, live at a lot of those games as the color guy, bringing as much color as anyone in the world has ever brought to a basketball game. And I don't know. Do you have any quick thoughts on Bill Walton and his impact in your basketball watching world?
Yeah, for me, obviously a little bit younger. A lot of it is as a commentator, and it brings me to. I know that comment got me laughing a little bit too. It brings me to specifically college basketball. Like he just always. You said it pretty well. He's as a color commentator gets. Adds a lot of spice to it, and in getting to talk to Luke a little bit during the time he covered the Kings, that was my first year and only got a handful of interactions with Luke, but you almost could feel that same sort of energy, just like the goofiness, and just seems like a very charismatic guy. And you could feel that in Luke a little bit as well, I felt like. So, yeah, I mean, he's definitely a big part of the basketball community, and, caught me off guard this morning, wishing the best for that entire family. But his commentary is definitely, from my perspective, what really stands out. And he just always he'd get you to laugh at some point in a broadcast. And I always appreciated the looseness that sort of came with that.
Yeah. So Bill Walton was one of the greatest college basketball players of all time, without any question. He's part of the great run at UCLA where they never lost for years. He came into the league and was phenomenal early in his career. Injuries derailed his career overall. I had the pleasure of meeting Bill Walton multiple times. First of all, he would show up in Sacramento for Luke's games. There was a point where he would show up. He would be in Sacramento for maybe a weekend or 3 or 4 games and just hang out. He would sit in the media room and ask his son questions during press conferences. Just a doting father, a very, very proud dad of his son. So that's one thing that stuck out. I've told the story a million times about the time Bill Walton blew me up and kicked me out of a media scrum. But I think, if you haven't heard that story, like he asked me to put my mic away and then like shoot me out of a media scrum that was just me and him and Paul Westphal, RIP, and Jim Gray. This was during the 1 year where the Maloofs decided to bring in Jim Gray as their sideline reporter and Bill Walton as a third on their broadcast for, I think it was 20 something games. Anyway, I think, the way that whole entire incident played out was one thing. It was like an eye-opening experience for me as a young journalist and reporter. But the aftermath of it to me was where I'll kind of go back to. I was on the court after the whole situation where Bill like blew me off, and then Paul Westphal like was very angry about it. Um, and he came over, and it took him like a good like 3 minutes to walk from half court to where I was on the baseline. And he came over and he apologized. He asked me my name. We had a conversation for a couple of minutes, and just he wanted to make sure that he was sorry if he offended me. Later on that same night, he actually found me again, introduced me to his wife, and again apologized profusely. And he was a very, very nice man who, by like the age, I think in his mid 50s, has already had like his ankles fused. He had a carbon fiber like cage in his spine to keep him upright. Like the injuries really did take a toll on him. And so I just want to make sure that we give the positives of Bill Walton, not just a funny story about how he like lit me up at one point, but like a really, really soft spoken, like gentle giant, if you will. And so I think the basketball world and the world itself lost a really colorful character and a very nice man today. So just want to send our condolences to the Walton family. And of course, Luke, who I knew very well, and I'm sure is absolutely distraught today. He adored his father, absolutely adored him, and just a really sad day for the Walton family.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, condolences. It's cool that I didn't know that Bill came around like that when Luke was head coach, because Luke was the year Luke got let go was my first year there, so I only got about 10 games max of Luke or so. But I'd imagine, I guess listeners aren't fully aware, but like the media room where everybody hangs out and eats and everything, having him in there has got to be some good energy in that room that lifts it up a little bit.
yeah, definitely, and not only that, but he would like sit in the press conference and then raise his hand. And then they would pass the mic to Bill, and he would ask a question, more to just mess with his son and like have a good time with it, but again like a good spirit, a good guy to have around. So yeah, definitely a sad day for the Walton family in the basketball world. Let's get to the standard business here. If you are watching on YouTube, we wouldn't mind if you gave us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. I don't think I turned it on where you have to subscribe in order to make a chat, to be in the chat. But it's good to see a lot of our friends from the Chatty House popping in. Hi, Spencer. This is a thing he does every single day in the
What's
Chatty
going on,
House.
guys?
Hi, Russell Hunt. Hi, Stephen Castaneda.
I would
Uh,
encourage people to leave questions throughout the show.
Yeah, leave questions. Like if we can take questions like throughout the show, we will. Hi, Jim Garfunkel. Hi, DFW. Amir. Almir, sorry. Brett Huff. Brett with already a zinger aimed at our good friend Brendan here. Dennis Youngblood. Sac Kings Rock. Welcome in, everybody. We're gonna do a live show. I don't know how long we'll last today. We got plenty of things to talk about outside of the passing of Bill Walton. But yeah, and I would even say when healthy, like this is very correct. When healthy, Walton was as good as anyone who's ever played, especially at the center position. He was just unbelievable. One of the first true passing big men in the league. Just had an incredible feel for the game and thought of the game in a much different way.
I guess
Um,
real quick, can you put that in perspective for me? Like when we're talking about dominant in college, like obviously I've heard stories and even through the NBA, obviously, but can I get a little educated on the player, Bill Walton, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the great rebounding, passing, scoring big men that we've seen. He thought the game like defensive wise, he was incredible. But again, the ankle injury started to slow him down very quickly in the NBA. At the college level, like UCLA went through like a stretch with him and Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as like their bigs, and I think they only lost one game over like a 6 or 7 or 8 year period. um, I would have to go back and look at the record books. But like they were the most dominant college program of all time. And he was like a number one pick coming into the draft. And just a tremendous, tremendous feel for the game. I think that's what like stood out, like his ability to just read everything. really the game flowed through him. Really, like a lot like a much taller, longer arm Domas. But in those days, you didn't have a bunch of big men running around averaging 8 or 9 assists a game. That just wasn't the way the game was played.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, there we go. They won 88 straight with Walton from Randy Ballin
Jesus.
at
Probably
the
made you
college
proud
level.
as a redhead, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's
That is
crazy.
insane.
Yeah, it's wild. He's also a huge, huge Grateful Dead fan. He toured with the Grateful Dead for many years. He was also an avid bicyclist. He bicycled all over the place, and he's part of like the L.A. Clippers, and I think I'm not the L.A. the San Diego Clippers, and I think that's kind of where Luke grew up. Luke grew up with a lot of like the beach. Played for the Celtics, the Portland Trailblazers. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but yeah. Anyway, it's
Makes sense. They
yeah.
seem like beach guys.
Oh no, totally. And Luke married like a college volleyball player, and Luke is a outstanding volleyball player from what I know, like a beach volleyball player. Like, if he didn't play in the NBA, he probably would have been a professional volleyball player.
I
So
could see it.
yeah, and then they have tall kids that also play volleyball. Yeah. So let's get to the next slate of news, and that is the Sacramento Kings and head coach Mike Brown. The situation is getting a little dicey, and like I wrote a piece earlier in the week. We saw some pieces, right after the season. There was one from Slater and from Amick that basically said that Mike was looking for 10 to 12 million dollars a year and looking for an extension. We saw it last week where Jake Fisher said the two sides were expected to be in the range of a certain amount. That's where the negotiations were expected. And then again, everything I've heard is ownership wasn't super happy about the Kings missing the playoffs. And I think that's not specifically aimed at Mike Brown. It's aimed at everybody. Like they just weren't happy. Vivek got a taste of the good life, and rightfully so. Wanted to continue the upward trend of making the playoffs and having sort of building what you're going to be, maybe your legacy as an owner and all that stuff with a long stretch. And in year two, the team fell short a little bit. They lost 2 more games than they did the previous season, although some of that could definitely be pinned on injuries late in the season. But also, I think that they just never felt like the same team from the year before. And again, that's something, ownership, they lost a lot of money when it came to not making the playoffs, not getting playoff dollar, all that stuff. And and so we're now at sort of an impasse. It's kind of a weird situation where Mike has got he had a 3-year contract with a 4th year as a mutual option. That option was not picked up, and so oh, am I back?
Yes, I was not sure if it was you or me, to be honest, but we're
No,
back.
it was me. It was me. Sorry about that, everybody. There we go. We got a freeze at 10:57.
We're back. You were on the mutual option.
Yeah. He had a mutual option. That option was not picked up because salaries for NBA coaches have skyrocketed since Mike signed his original deal. We talked a little bit about this last week, but from what I know, Mike's contract is for less than what Luke Walton was making during his time in Sacramento. Luke, I think, got a 4-year 20, something like that, at basically 5 million a year, and Mike makes less than 5 million a year. And it just so happens that Monty Williams, during the last, like after Mike got his job, Monty Williams signed for an astronomical amount. What is it? A 5-year 75? No, uh, 6 years, whatever it was, is 13 million a year. And once that happened, the floodgates opened. Greg Popovich signed a massive extension that pays
It was
him
678 for money.
678. Okay, so Popovich is 16 million a year. Steve Kerr got a 2-year, $35 million deal, so 17.5 million. Eric Spoelstra signed a 8-year, $120 million contract extension. And it doesn't just stop with like the top end of the top end coaches. First of all, I'm not going to put Monty Williams in the top end of the top end. Monty is his career record nowhere near as good as Mike Brown's. And he got paid as if he were like one of the best of the best. But we've seen Jason Kidd get an extension. We've seen Mike Budenholzer get a 5-year, $50 million contract to coach the Phoenix Suns. So the point is that the salaries have moved from where they used to be to where they are going forward. And Mike Brown would like to be paid what people that have a 607 career win percentage with a ton of playoff experience and 4 championship rings as an assistant coach, he'd like to get paid in that way.
2 coach of the years, you know. But my question here, I guess sort of a two-parter. Have you ever seen any sort of inflation jump like this? And I'm curious because I do feel like obviously this is just a new market based on everything you laid out. But at what point does that like fully get accepted and embraced? Do you feel like we're already past that point where this is just the new normal? Or, you know, when does it's just kind of weird to me that this just seemingly sort of happened out of nowhere where Monty got paid and all the other coaches are like, well, I deserve the same, which I think is understandable. But have you ever seen any sort of inflation jump like this? Not necessarily has to be coaching, but in any sort of like, I guess, specific role like this? I feel like the fall off is, or just the things that are happening since, it's just a weird way for it to initially happen.
Yeah, Brenden, that's a great question. To be honest, we haven't seen a coaching spike like this that I can remember. But you also have to look at this as number one, the player spike has happened time and time again, right? Like anytime there's a new CBA, if they don't do what's called a smoothing out, which is what they're doing this time, right? So when the new television money comes in, just so everyone knows, I'll sidebar here for a sec. The new television money comes in, which is going to jump from like $2.8 billion a year to, we're looking at, it sounds like 7.5 to 8 billion a year. So that jump is astronomical, right? That's huge. And so normally the players all like line up where they're going to be free agents the year that something like that would happen, because the salary cap has to jump, because it's got to be the players have to get 51% of what's called BRI, basketball related income. Television deal is part of basketball related income, right? So there would be a spike, and this is where you had the Warriors were able to go out and sign Kevin Durant because the spike happened. Well, they're going to do what's called a smoothing this year. And the smoothing is going to be the salary cap is going to go up 10% a year, and for years from here on out, because that's how, until they catch up. And so that means that the salary cap this year is like 141 million. Next year it'll be 155. The year after that it'll be 170, like 171. The year after that it'll be like 188. A year after that it'll be like $205 million, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to make those 10% increments. Whatever the players aren't getting is going to be rerouted back to the players in like an escrow account. And then I think that they're going to level up everybody across the board with all the money that came in, right? So if there's an extra, let's say $1 billion, and then each team gets a chunk of that, 30 teams. So each team gets, I don't know what the math would be there. I'm not going to do the math in my head right now. But maybe it's 330 million. Is that what no, 33 million. Each team would get that much. Then they would go back in and raise player salaries to accommodate that number, because they have to get to that 51% of basketball related income. So that's all. Excuse me. That's all on the basketball side. But Brenden, the problem is the coaches have never got in on all this,
Right.
right?
Right.
And this is an opportunity for the coaches to get on it And not only that, I think the biggest point that I would make is we see the top end getting all this money, and then where sort of the bottom end is. Number one, Mike Brown isn't a bottom end coach. He's a guy who, again, has a 607 career win percentage. But also, it's sort of on Mike to make sure that the number is solidified, to make sure that 9 or 10 or 11 million dollars a year for a coach that is as good as him is the number. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So do you think we're going to get to the point where that's just every coach in the NBA is around that range, or at least like 25 of them, you know?
No, I would say that there's probably going to be like there's going to be a lot of coaches that get up and around this range, and then like we don't know if it's going to go up from here. But
Right.
certainly, if the players' salaries are going up, and we're hearing that like in year 5 of this new CBA and this new television contract, players that are signing 5-year extensions are going to have $400 million extensions.
We're at a lake house. We got family coming in and out, but I'm listening.
All right, yeah. Way to just roll with it. Way to just roll with it, Brenden. Um, so yeah, my point would be that like if the players are getting all this extra money, eventually it's going to trickle down to the coaches, right? Nothing better than a live show. There we go. You all right, Brenden?
Yeah, she's trying to hide from the camera, and I think she did the exact opposite. It was just, I'm good. I'm good. I'm
She's
listening. I'm just laughing a little bit.
Yeah, she's now
I
out of
guess
the frame.
the one thing that I would ask here, or I feel like the other important part of the conversation is just about last year and how last year went. Like you mentioned, it kind of was, they didn't keep up the upward trajectory necessarily, which I think is normal. I think that it's not all linear when it comes to growing a team. You can look at Denver, you can look at Minnesota. Those are the teams that guys like to point to a lot. But was last year really that disappointing, or necessarily I'm really trying here, guys. Was was last year? I don't know how much of last year's disappointments, quote unquote, I can really put on Mike. I feel like he did what he could with. She did draw way more attention to herself. Um, I feel like he did what he could with what he had available. There were a lot of injuries, essentially ran it back, didn't really make improvements at the trade deadline when it came to that. If I would assume that is part of this conversation, then I just don't feel like I can point myself to last year and be like, Mike didn't take advantage of what he had in front of him. I felt like it was properly utilized. People do love to point to the rotations. I get the frustration there. But what I would say is that he was searching because there wasn't really a good answer. I think he had reasons to search. It was very obvious when he was searching. You could see it in a rotation. You can tell he's just trying, sometimes almost throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. But that's how you get Keon Ellis. That was a learned thing from Steve Kerr. You try everybody, keep everybody engaged. But from your perspective, is there anything that when it comes to last year that you're like, man, Mike really just didn't take care of this?
No, to be honest with you, I thought he tried just about everything possible. And, remember the moments where he turned to JaVale McGee and gave JaVale McGee like 5-game stints. And sometimes those 5-game stints would turn into a 1-game stint because you're like, man, or the first half. And it'd be like, man, what in the world just happened? I'm not going to do that again. Or I'm going to try something different in the second half. I think that he relied on guys like Alex Len. Once Alex Len sort of proved that he's part of the rotation, I think he was able to really like allow Malik Monk to grow into the player he's become. You're right about finding Keon Ellis, but also look at what his coaching staff has done with Keegan Murray, turning him from what should have been like a league average defender to a plus defender in the span of one season.
And
And
De'Aaron, like De'Aaron talks just like Mike Brown. I don't know
yeah,
if you feel that too, but they speak the exact same language. And I feel like that's a great sign. They seem to be on the same page. I mean, Mike's always talking about when he had him at a, what is it, NYBL camp or Adidas Nations camp, whatever it is, when they were young. Or when De'Aaron was young and he saw the defender then. Like De'Aaron is totally bought into the defensive end. And I feel like he talks just like Mike. He feels like the perfect coach for him in my mind.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, like we can talk about the players that regress this year, right? We can say, okay, but Harrison Barnes really struggled. He did not put up the same numbers. And to be honest, a lot of that is on Harrison taking a back seat and not being assertive. We can also look at Kevin Herter and say, what happened to Kevin Herter? And did Mike mess with Kevin Herter too much? And to be honest with you, like it's not on Mike to go out there and hit 3-point shots. It's on Mike to put guys in a position to hit 3-point shots, and whether they make them or not, there's nothing you can do about a player who goes from averaging 15.3 points per game, has his career year under you in one season, and comes back the next year and barely averages 10 and can't hit the broadside of the barn for long stretches of the season.
And
And
same with the
so
free throws.
yeah, and so you could say, well, Mike did mess with Kevin Herter, but look, like in preseason where he said, "Hey, I'm going to start Chris Duarte a couple of games," right? And of course, Chris Duarte gets hurt after one game, so it didn't really matter, anyways. But I would say, like as a coach, it's your job to keep pushing and pushing and pushing every individual player. You have to reach every individual player in a different way. And maybe that's something that Mike learned this year, that the way that he tried to approach Kevin wasn't really the way that Kevin receives coaching. And that's okay because look, every player, you have to treat everybody the same. You have the same set of rules for everybody. But that doesn't mean that you actually coach everybody the same and that you have the same conversations with everybody. And so I think that there was a point where, like, look, maybe Mike lost Kevin Herter a little bit, or Kevin got lost in his own head, and then you had to like give him space to try to figure it out. But that's coaching. And again, how is a coach to know that a player is going to lose 5 points a game off his scoring average? When again, he was the third leading scorer on the Kings a year before. And so it's difficult to like maintain with the same exact group every year and try to keep building, especially when you didn't make any marked like improvements to the roster at all.
Yeah, and I think people are quick to forget. Like I know sometimes players don't get treated as like human, or it's easy to forget a little bit from a fan perspective, but I feel like coaches get that even more extreme. Like coaches get better over time as well. You know, Mike is getting more accustomed to this roster. He's getting better at coaching each one of these guys every year and time that passes. You know, I really do think that he is somebody that in a way is a player's coach and does seem to get along with his players. I don't feel like, even when there was the little bit of weird Kevin Herter stuff, it didn't necessarily feel like an animosity towards Mike, but just more so specifically frustration with the situation, probably including himself. You know, he knows he was not playing that well. And he talked at his exit interviews about some of his offseason work, how maybe he feels like he wants to mess with that. I'm a mess today, guys.
I'm loving Brendan's struggles. This is a great
Struggles
day.
are crazy. My little brother left his iPad. It's loud over here. Point being, I think Mike has done everything. I really don't know what else he would need to prove right now. I get the thought that maybe eventually there's another guy that goes to the next level, right? I can't help but shake. Like there's a lot of talk about how Vivek and how he likes the Warriors, right? Or potentially trying to follow the Warriors path. And to me, I can't help but think about Mark Jackson. And I just don't think that's this situation. I don't think that you need a guy that takes you to the next step, that he's the motivator, and you need somebody to come in and really change things up for the schemes. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. And if you come in and somebody throws everything over, tries to rewrite the way that this works, that things could just get blown out of proportion. And I really think it would just be one of the first dominoes. You know, I know I've said it before, but I can't help but think, how is De'Aaron going to feel if a coach that he seems to like, and, you know, how many times has this happened that he ends up gone? You know, there's only a matter of time before a player asks out. I'm not saying that like I know anything, but like it just, I feel like that's obvious. Eventually you could reach to that point. I feel like it's a, you know, reasonable concern in this aspect. But I really don't feel like this is a Mark Jackson where you need somebody else to take you to your next step. And honestly, even if it is, I don't feel like we're far enough along to know. I feel like you still need more steps of Mike before we really know. There's a foundation being laid. It feels like there's some sort of culture. You know what to expect with Kings basketball right now, I feel like. And there's value in that, from free agency, from what Malik Monk is trying to figure out, the guys that are currently on the team, the morale and all of that. I think he's building something, and that needs to continue to be built. It can get teared down very quickly, and I just really think that would be the wrong decision.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up a quote here from Dennis Youngblood. James, stop. Good coaches get fired. Winning coaches get fired. Losing coaches get fired. I totally agree with that. I would tell you this, though. I've covered this team. This was my 14th season. And in that 14 years, I think this was my 9th head coach. A lot of coaches got fired that weren't good coaches or that didn't have a way to make this team better. And you can't ignore the fact that in 39 years in Sacramento, the Kings have had 10 500 plus records. 8 of those are Rick Adelman. 2 of them are Mike Brown. That's it. Like, he's done something here that no one else outside of Rick Adelman has been able to do in almost 40 years.
Can I ask, how much do you think that should matter? Like, obviously they were historically shit, to be honest, but how much should that matter when we're talking about Mike?
Well, I think it should matter a ton, that the fact that you haven't, I mean, again, how many head coaches has Vivek had? Let's see, Mike Malone, Ty Corbin, George Karl, Dave Yeager, Luke Walton, Alvin Gentry. And so this is his 7th coach, and he took over the team in 2013. So, yeah, I mean, you should already be able to understand that you have a guy who's built the winning culture that you wanted. Now, whether that means he's going to keep winning, we don't know. But certainly 2 years of building a winning culture and finishing over 500 does matter. You know, the fact that they won 2 less games this year and went from the 3rd seed in the Western Conference to the 9th seed, that's because, number 1, the West got better. But number 2, that's not really a drop off. I mean, you can listen to Mike or De'Aaron talk about how they lost 5 games this season because they missed free throws. 5 games where, and you're not even talking about making all your free throws. You're just saying, just make what your team averages, and you would have won 5 more.
Yeah. Well, and De'Aaron won the inaugural Clutch Player of the Year last year. Like, you know, that's a credit to him. He's a very talented guy in those situations, but those are kind of coin flips sometimes. You know, they won a lot of close games last year, and that's not going to happen every year.
Yeah. No, it's tough, man. I don't know. And there could come a point, just like what you said, where Mike Brown can't get the team over the hump, right? But that's not year 2 of a build. And just like the elephant in the room, you got 2 months, 3 months into this season and knew your team wasn't good enough. You did. You knew that you lacked the length and athleticism of all of the teams around you in the Western Conference. Other teams, they went out and made moves, and you didn't. And you rode with the same group of dudes all the way through the season, expect never came. And the fact is that the Dallas Mavericks went out and made 2 what have now become substantial moves at the deadline. You know, the Gafford trade has proven to be huge for them. The PJ Washington trade is probably the reason why they're in the Western Conference Finals. He played so incredibly well through the first 2 rounds. Whether or not he's the reason they get to the finals, probably not. That's probably Luka and Kyrie, but it doesn't change the fact that that team made major adjustments. And most of the teams that they're competing with continue to make adjustments throughout the last year and a half that the Kings just haven't made. And so I think that not only is stability and continuity something that this franchise has started to preach, but at one point does that mean like actually sticking to what you're saying? You know, like sticking with the leader that you have that has won games where no one else did in Sacramento. And so I don't know. For me, like there could come a point where this doesn't make any where Mike Brown can't get you over the hump. I don't know, but I don't think it's certainly after year 2.
For sure. We just don't know enough yet. I
Yeah.
feel like something is starting. And even if, as much as I have my gripes about Mark Jackson, like there are pros that come. If eventually they need to take a next step, fine. But we really can't know yet. And I think that there's also the aspect of I don't even know what a different coach would look like. Like, who would we even be talking about that's out there right now? This is a whole coaching staff we're talking about. Luke Laux got in a good relationship with De'Aaron Fox. He's a big Mike guy. I would imagine if Mike's gone, that Luke's probably gone. This is a whole overchange that we'd be talking about. And I can't help but think that restarting wouldn't be anything but Kings, same old Kings, to be honest, and you'd right back to middle of the pack. I do feel like you have something going. I do feel like there's a shell of an identity. I know somebody pointed out earlier, like, yes, there were a lot of inconsistencies last year, but I do feel like you knew what they were preaching and what they were trying to do while they were out there, even if they didn't have the ideal pieces to necessarily do it. And I think just having an identity is a really big thing that Mike has started. And it's, at least since I've covered the team, I think I'm going into year 4. This is the first time I've really seen them have an identity like this. And it seems like the players have bought in. I just, it's kind of mind blowing to me, to be honest. I think this should be a no brainer.
Yeah, I think it's intriguing for sure. I'm not sure why we're at this point, and it just seems way too early in the lifespan of this head coach to be in this point. And partially that's like, again, let me make a parallel. Let me like, people understand, right? The reason why Malik Monk doesn't have early bird, he only has early bird rights and not full Larry Bird rights, is because he only signed a 2-year deal, even though he was eligible for up to a 4-year deal with the mid-level exception, which is what the Kings signed him for, right? So now you get 2 years in, and it limits what you can do with him. It makes it so the only way you can retain him, there's a dollar amount that you can retain him for, and not a penny over. It's like 17.4 million starting salary. Where if you would have given him a 3-year deal, number one, he'd be playing out this year at like 10.5 million or something. But number two, he would have full Larry Bird rights, and he would be extension eligible this offseason, where you could give him the big money that he's looking for. And that kind of feels like, again, this contract that they signed with Mike Brown. They had given Dave Yeager a 4-year deal. They gave George Karl, I believe, a 4-year deal. They gave Michael Malone a 4-year deal. And Michael Malone got paid like 2.5 years after he was gone. He got paid. They gave Tyrone Corbin a 2-year, fully guaranteed head coaching like salary. And they gave Luke Walton a 4-year contract. When they got to Mike Brown, they hedged their bet with the final year. So if things didn't go well, they could fire him like at the beginning of this year, have an interim coach, and then start over fresh the next year. Well, then he won. And he's done something no one else has been able to do, win. So that's where you open this door for him for the final year to not be picked up. And now we're looking at like your coach going into a lame duck season. And that's where my concern is. My concern is, like, look, Mike Brown, I've covered so many head coaches. It's crazy. Like, again, I think it's 9.
I'm already on 4 somehow.
You're already on 4?
I think it's 4. It's Luke Alvin. Oh, 3. But I had 3 in 2 years, the first 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I had, let's see, Westfall. I had Keith Smart, Michael Malone, Ty Corbin, George Karl, Dave Yeager, Luke Walton, Alvin Gentry, Mike Brown. So 9. Yeah. Yeah. So my problem too is that, like, we're looking at, like, they're building a culture, and what does that mean for Malik Monk? Does Malik Monk want to come back to a situation where maybe it's not stable? And not only that, but like, if we go back to the Rudy Gay's statement about welcome to basketball hell, his statement was very much predicated on the fact that he signed up to play for one coach, and that coach got fired like a month later, and he wasn't the only one who felt that way. That they had joined the Kings to play for Michael Malone, and he had worked with Malone the year before and loved Michael Malone and was like, okay, we got something here. Let's go. And then you cut your legs out from underneath you. And I worry about similar things happening here in Sacramento with Domas signing a massive extension last year. You're waiting to see if and when De'Aaron Fox will sign an extension. He probably won't this summer, just because he didn't make All NBA, and that has an impact on how much money he can get paid. But Malik Monk, there's other players here that are involved that you want. You can only imagine would like to see Mike stick around. I don't know that there's any player. There were players like over the last few years, not this last year or the year before. There were players that didn't love playing for other head coaches, and whether they made it fully known or is more of like the unknown out there in the public that we knew behind the scenes. There are players who would rather not have been in Sacramento still. That's just not the case that I've seen with Mike. So kind of
I'd
an
imagine even like the reporting that's going on right now and this whole kind of back and forth is a little like unnerving to Malik, trying to figure it out. It's like, well, clearly they're not very sure about this guy. I had a question for you and it just totally slipped my mind. So obviously Vivek's got all this going on with the A's, right? Bringing them over. There's finances involved with that, from my understanding. And I bring this up to say a lot of people are talking about the finances online when it comes to this. From your perspective, not to put you on the spot too much, how much of it do you think has to do with a willingness to spend here? Obviously, his results and the results of the team in general factor into that. But how much of it, from your perspective, do you think has to do with just like a willingness to spend as they're getting closer to the cap here?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say, like, when it comes to players or to coaching.
I guess I was thinking coaching
Okay.
for
Okay.
Mike
So
specifically.
coaching, it has nothing to do with the cap. We understand that, right? So whatever they're going to pay, they're going to pay. I think that there is more of a reluctance to extend Mike out long term because look, he's already under contract for next season. So we're talking about the year after, the year after, the year after. And if you don't like what happened this last season, if you're uncomfortable with like the path forward, but understand that you are sort of pot committed to this path, I think it's more about maybe years than it is the dollar amount. Like I think that they aren't that far off as far as what the Kings are willing to offer, and what Mike Brown would be willing to take as far as like the dollar per year. I think they are far apart on how many years that's going to be. And, part of that is like as a head coach, you want stability. You want to know that if you sign a 3-year deal here right now, and that puts you under contract for 4 years, that you're at least going to get, you're going to see 3 years of that money no matter what. And that's something that, because if you lose a head coaching job at this point, I mean, Mike Brown will be a high level assistant in the league for years, making, $1.5 to $3 million a year as a lead assistant. Like he could go on coaching for a long time and not have the stress and the rigor of being a head coach. But it would be difficult for him to get he might not get another head coaching job, especially right away. Maybe he would, but it's also possible he wouldn't.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense. How much do you think that his dude, I'm losing everything that I'm about to say right as I start. The lake is really taking me over here. Do you think that when it comes to Mike, that there's a way that we go into this year and this just remains the way? That this is just in a way a lame duck season, that this is kind of what we're going to be dealing with? Or do you feel like something has to be settled either way before the year starts? Because everybody talks about a lame duck year, the last year of a head coach, right? Practically not existing. Where are you at when it comes to the current year that does still remain?
I just think it's a huge mistake because, again, you're putting your free agency, you're putting everything else into question. So let's just say, like in some weird world where the Sacramento Kings are able to go out and trade for Brandon Ingram, right? I don't know how. we'll just, whatever contract however you build a contract, I mean, the trade, you figure out a way. Like, people should know that Brandon Ingram's on a 1-year deal. He's on he makes he has a 1-year, $36 million contract remaining. Now he's eligible to sign for a long-term extension. But that doesn't mean he will. And if you're going to go through a season with a lame duck coach, and the guy, like, literally a lame duck coach means the Kings could fire him at any time. Winning, losing, it doesn't matter. They could fire him at any time.
Which
And
would screw your whole season. You fire the coach in the middle of the season's done, right? Like,
well,
I
it
mean,
has
not
every other time they fired the head coach, because I've been through a bunch of them. So yeah, it does. It typically just blows your season to pieces.
yeah. Alvin was just a weird, teacher that assistant teacher. What's the term? Whatever.
Substitute teacher.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's just complex, right? Like, we don't know how all the pieces work together, and you could have players who maybe haven't outwardly said it, or maybe have said it to management. Hey, I don't know if this is going to be the right thing. I don't think that's the case, though. It sure does feel like everybody has been on the same page. We have 100% buy-in each and every season that we've been there. And I think the other point that I would make is that two of the four teams that are in the conference finals right now are defensive juggernauts, right? We know that the best two defensive teams in the NBA are the Boston Celtics and the Minnesota Timberwolves. I don't think there's any question. That's how you win in the
Yeah.
playoffs. And I know
Dallas too. Like, Dallas got really good defensively after the trade, and even Indiana. I feel like Indiana is the other end of it, where they're fully offensive. And in my mind, you're seeing that can only get you to a point.
Yeah. I totally agree. So, I mean, Indiana came in as a non-defensive team, and they're learning like the Kings did last year on the fly. Like, hey, how do we get to the next level? And that's not easy. It's a difficult thing to do, is to grow, to get better defensively as you're moving through a season. It really isn't like super simple, right? Anyway, I think it's a good conversation, and people in the chat here, like, every coach has flaws. It's totally true. Every single player has flaws. Every coach has flaws. It just is what it is. And it's your job to, like, build a group around that. And I think that's one thing that Mike has done. Mike has been a defensive minded coach forever. He brought in Jay Triano, who is an offensive minded coach and has done really, really good things with the offense. The offense took a step back, but I think you can point to a lot of reasons why the offense took a step back. And some of that is just straight up on certain players that didn't have the same type of season they had the year before. And that's not easy. So Jim Thurlkill is asking, where is Sean? Sean is at Bottle Rock for the weekend. And we're just gonna leave him. I don't know. I hope he's not in a ditch somewhere, but I mean, let's be honest, there's always that possibility, right?
Yeah. He'll get out of that ditch eventually. He'll be all right.
He will eventually climb out of the ditch, and
It'll be a great story.
It will. Probably we can't talk about it here. Brenden, what we're watching the finals play out, the conference finals play out in a very different way than I expected them to. Like, I don't think that either one of these series are all that competitive. Within the games, they're competitive, but aren't we at 3-0 with both series?
We are, which is
And,
kind of crazy. I expected a little bit on the Boston Indy side. I thought Indy might get a game, but the West side it's pretty crazy. I'm sure for some Kings fans, watching Luka do this isn't the most enjoyable experience, but I think that team is crazy. I do really enjoy them. I am a big PJ Washington guy. The Gafford trade, obviously, those things, as you mentioned, have done a lot for their team. And they're a great example of the importance of role players. You can really see how that team turned around just by getting the right complementary pieces, even though the stars are the exact same. And even the willingness to admit your mistakes quickly. I've always appreciated that in teams. They signed Grant Williams. They were willing to move off from that quickly when they realized it necessarily wasn't the right fit, and sort of restructure a little bit. But it's been entertaining. I like all the shit talking. I like that Luka talks, to be honest. And I still don't think. I do think Dallas is winning, obviously. I think Minnesota's got a game or two in them still, though. After that last game or last series, they went down 2-0 also in those home games. I thought they might have stole it in Dallas yesterday, but they didn't, obviously. Um, they have fight. I think that they are kind of internally, they have some sense of belief, specifically, I feel like, with Ant. And I think they'll fight a little bit more, but obviously probably going to go towards Dallas here. And I hope they can put up a fight in the finals. I hope we at least get a little bit more of a competitive finals here, but not as entertaining necessarily as I would have hoped.
Yeah, I think first of all, I've always been harsh on Luca because I don't love the incessant complaining. To me, it's crazy. And I've even tried to explain it. Like if you watch him live, it's much different than watching on TV because it doesn't stop. Like all you see is tidbits of it on TV when they pan out wide. The entire time he's yelling at officials, and I think that he's for the most part curb that throughout this series and throughout the playoffs. And I think we're starting to see him find his joy as a basketball player. And that's when it's like, oh boy, like this is one of the most talented players in the league and what he's doing right now. And if he's playing with a smile on his face, like he's devastating. My goodness, he's so good. And
And
so,
I think Kyrie deserves like somewhat of some credit for that. Take away all the off court stuff and all the stuff that comes with Kyrie, but I think he and Paul George to me are the two stars that you could just throw anywhere and they will fit in. And that's not a very easy skill. I think it's something that's acquired. Obviously, Kyrie's done it in a couple spots, but he really just kind of flawlessly fits in and lets Luca be Luca.
yeah, I even think that he's empowered Luca in a weird way. And I think he's also shown Luca the way. I think he's put a pathway hey, look, man, you have to involve people. You can't do it on your own. You've got to have support. You have to empower people like PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford and every other player that Derek Jones Jr. How in the world is Derek Jones Jr. figuring out how to really fit in and be an impactful player at 27 years old? And you say again, like Daniel Gafford, who's their big man that got hurt yesterday?
Lively.
Oh yeah, Derek Lively. Just they're finding ways to make these players better, and I think that's the influence that Kyrie's had on this team. It's he's had on Luca specifically. It's like going to Luca and making sure he understands what it is to be a teammate and not just showing everybody in the world how good you are at the game of basketball. It's showing the whole world how good you can make a team at the game of basketball. And that's something that I think Luca's learning right now. Definitely.
Totally. The other thing I have to say is the dunk that Ant had yesterday was ridiculous. I do not understand how he gets more height as he hits somebody. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Ant just, I could watch that guy dunk the ball on people all day long.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's been tremendous all the way through. You kind of feel bad for him because it just feels like they've met their match all of a sudden. And I think it's interesting that we always kind of run into these moments in the NBA where I don't think the Pelicans are a better team than the Kings because they didn't show that they're a better team throughout an 80. They're right at the same pace. But the fact that they beat the Kings 6 times, went 6-0 against them is crazy. But the fact that the Kings could beat Dallas, the fact that the Kings could beat Minnesota, they won the season series against Minnesota, against Denver, OKC, they're, split. Like there are always going to be matchup problems in the NBA, and you just don't expect them to show up like this. And all of a sudden, the matchup issues, okay, this is trouble. I mean, again, Minnesota. I thought Jokic said it right. Like Minnesota's built to beat us.
Yeah. It's
Very
literally Tim
specific.
Conley. Like he built the team and he built the team to beat him.
Yeah, yeah. It's like someone playing chess against themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. And surprisingly, they were able to do it. And then you get to this series, and again, they're able to do what every other team has done to Rudy Gobert, and that's almost play him off the court because he can't stick on the perimeter, and it's tough because it's not like Rudy Gobert's doing anything wrong. It's just nearly impossible. I mean, that switch where Luca hit what are we doing switching right there? That to me was crazy. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and
Anyway,
Dallas just has so many like perimeter creators. Well, specifically when you talk Kyrie and Luka, I feel like they do it way differently. Luka is like more physical, kind of goes through you. I feel like he doesn't really struggle with the length necessarily of Jaden McDaniels, a little, more thin and can kind of go through him. And then Kyrie's just a totally different beast. Obviously, maybe the craziest handle there is. And even like Jaden Hardy was doing it a little bit. There was a play yesterday where it looked like Jaden Hardy came out and was going to give the ball back to Luka, and Luka saw that Gobert was on him and just kind of waved him off like, you got it. And it's crazy to me that a guy that was picked in the second round, they're telling to ISO the 4-time defense player of the year, and it's the right move. And I think he picked up his 4th foul on that play.
It's crazy.
It's a weird dynamic because, I'm always torn because I get the maybe people being hesitant about some of Gobert's skills, but at the same time, there is a reason that he won those awards.
Yeah, no, I think there is. Especially, there's a reason why that team is the best defensive team in the league, and a lot of it is on him. I want to let's tie this back to the Kings though. When you're watching, is there something that you're looking at and you just go, man, the Kings don't have that, and they got to find a way to get it?
It's probably just the ideal role pieces. I think typically if like the Kings were anywhere near this situation, there'd be a guy or two playing that you're just like, I probably shouldn't be out here, is really what it is, or specifically the defensive pieces that also fit in and do their job offensively. They just don't look totally out of sorts, or I think there's players that could be out there that would get totally ignored on the perimeter. So to me, it's really quality depth. And I do think that it does stand out to me. I think all the things Mike has been preaching, specifically on the defensive end and winning the possession battle, I feel like you see it be important in a lot of these games. And I think it's more so on the Kings' perspective, just not necessarily having the ideal personnel. But to me, I think that in big time situations, I'm a truster of De'Aaron. I think that Domas can help run an offense throughout the course of it. I think it's just about getting more ideal complementary pieces and maybe one more guy that you can just say, we need a bucket, go get one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you truly lost when Malik left. When Malik got injured, is that you lost your secondary creator, and the Kings just look different when Malik is healthy. Yeah, so for me, it is like length, athleticism, wing and big. Like I'm just going through the chat. There's a lot of people making very like when I'm watching there may be a handful of players that stand out that like the Kings need that type of guy. And number one, it's the Jaden McDaniels or even Derek Jones Jr. player that like you have to have that guy. And then the other one is you got to find a Nas Reed. And I don't know how you find a Nas Reed. And like I've been sort of compiling, like Kyle and I on the Insiders have been compiling a list of potential guys who you might be able to go chase during whether they're free agents or whether, like I think Nick Claxton is an unrestricted free agent. I think that there is a lot of guys that you need to go out and like sort of find that forceful, like whether he can hit the three. If he can hit the three, it's great. Like I mean, if you can somehow pry Isaiah Stewart out of Detroit, that makes sense. I think Nick Richards is another guy who's quietly kind of building this type of game with Charlotte. I like Brandon Clark, although he's coming off injury and he's owed quite a bit of money, and he can't shoot the three. Like Jared Vanderbilt is another guy who, again, he not a great 3-point shooter, but rangy, rangy defender at the 4. I think that's a type of guy that the Kings fully need.
For sure. My understanding is, the Kings liked Nas Reed before, kind of chased after him a little bit last summer. He ended up going back to Minnesota, but that type of guy makes a lot of sense. A guy that can play the 4 next to Domas and also be your backup 5, I think would be very ideal way to go and try and spend your money, but obviously not the easiest prototype to exactly go out there and get. But I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you heard it too, James, that Mike is talking up the length and athleticism of the team that they happen to be going up against that night. I got to the point where I'm like, I almost feel like he's like asking for help here because he keeps talking about how, the other team, they're really long and athletic. And it got to a point where I just heard, they're a lot longer than us.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of a reality of this team.
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's going to be sort of the thing that I don't want to say it's the offense defense because, like, look, I think if you take a glance at the Indiana Pacers roster, um, you know, while I don't think Indiana has any business being in the Eastern Conference Finals, like that, not that they've lucked into it, but like injuries played a role in where they are for sure. Injuries to the other teams. And now they have an injury of their own, which is going to play into whether or not they could even steal a game, maybe. But it's not just like the guards that they have that have just been phenomenal throughout the playoffs, whether it's Nemhard or it's Tyrese Halliburton or it's TJ McConnell. Those guys have all been tremendous, but it's this whole group of like super athletic bigs, whether it's Miles Turner or it's um, Isaiah Jackson. They even Jalen Smith plays here and there, but it's all those other players that they have that like have also made a huge difference and are tough to match up against in certain situations. Even someone brings up Obi Toppin.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are definitely some guys in there that that the Kings could use. I think Indiana might even be a nice trade partner for the Kings yet again.
for sure. I mean, I also think that like you can think back to the closeouts earlier this year. The closeouts were a big thing for the Kings to the point where Mike said that, you know, he and his staff had to go more in detail than he had ever done in his career on just sort of coaching closeouts. Part of that is because they're not very long. You know, I remember specifically against New Orleans, I think that was a big part of it, is that Trey Murphy's tall as heck and his release is really high in the air. And if you don't have that length to be able to go and contest, it gets felt, and it gets felt in a lot of different areas. And I think that was the case this year.
Yeah, and I just some people are throwing some names into the chat, and like Zach Edey. I mean, first of all, I'm not taking Zach Edey at number 13, and if he made it to the second round, I still have a tough time because like look, I just don't know that we talk about length, and he certainly has the size and the length, but the missing piece is the athleticism. I don't know that number one, I don't think he's going to be Rudy Gobert as a defensive player. And he might be a better offensive player than Rudy Gobert, but I don't know that he can run with the Kings, and I don't know that he can run with most NBA teams. I think that's going to be a huge problem for Zach Edey.
I know we're a king spot and the whole thing is an offensive center, but I keep me away from offensive centers in the draft. I think I'm good. I don't want to post up center. I just don't. I don't think it's a smart use of that pick, specifically from a Kings perspective, but even in general.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting. Pick a House says in the chat says Donovan Klingen. Well, there we go. Like, look, he's a type of player that it sure does look like the Kings are interested in. So if you start looking around, like who the names that the Kings have been associated, even if it's loosely, a Jared Allen, we talked about this, Jonas Valanciunas. Jonas Valanciunas is a dude who, you know, like I know a lot of Kings fans don't like because of the Chimezie Metu situation, but at the same time, it sure does look like the Kings might be looking for a big to put alongside Sabonis for at least somewhat of a time. Yeah, so interesting. The clinging, I bring up clinging because our friend Sean Cunningham said, according to one of his sources, that the Kings actually interviewed him at the Combine. And again, that could be for all kinds of reasons. Like down the road, you might definitely have a conversation with a player like that, right? Like he's a guy that you could chase. I don't think the Kings are going to move up in the draft, and I don't think Clean is going to drop down to them in the draft. This is a weird draft. Like I don't. I've talked about this a little bit, and we talked about it before the lottery about moving up, and then I looked at NBA salaries for draft picks. The first pick in this year's draft, Brenden, makes $13.2 million starting
In the
salary.
first year, damn.
The second pick is 11.8 million. The third pick is 10.6. The fourth pick is 9.6. The fifth pick is 8.7. 7.9 for the sixth pick. 7.2 for the seventh pick. Even the Kings pick at number 13 is 4.9 million bucks. That's a lot.
I really should have been an NBA player, James.
Well, you clearly got the guns to do it.
No, don't think so. Don't think so. If I could have, I would. I wouldn't be here. Love you, but I
That's
wouldn't
funny.
be here.
That's right. That's right. Cooper says the Kings should trade 13 and 17 for 13 for 17 and 21. I don't know that you want 2 picks in this year's draft. I don't. Again, we can argue this if we want, but I don't think this year's draft is particularly great. I do think that being 10 through 20, just like dollar for dollar, is probably more advantageous than being in the top 10. Because I don't know how much you're going to get out of those guys in the top 10 early on in their careers. And it's a lot of money to spend on someone that you don't know what you're getting. But
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
I think people should keep in mind, like, this is all part of the process. These are guys that are going to be in the league and part of future trade conversations or future
Mhm.
free agencies. Like, you just want to be familiar in general.
Yeah, totally, totally. And the other guy who's around the Kings range, that's a center, a big man that we're talking about is Filipowski from Duke. And he went out there and did one of the rarest things I've ever seen. He's taller than his wingspan.
Oh, he's got a negative, huh? That makes
He's
sense
got
with the shooting a little bit.
he's got a negative. He's a 6'10" and a like 0.75 height and a 6'10" and a quarter like wingspan. I don't know that I've seen that.
I think, yeah, no, I don't think I've seen anybody with that height, right? But there's a lot of shooters. Like, I think JJ Redick's a negative wingspan. And why do I want to say Bruce Bowen? I could be wrong with Bowen. I know
Bruce
Redick.
Bruce Bowen or Bruce Brown?
See, now I'm questioning myself.
Uh,
I don't know, but I think it's typically a shooter thing. That I must help out with the movement sort of thing. But I think JJ has that. I haven't seen it with a big though.
yeah, the guards. I mean, I think yeah, Desmond Bain looks like a negative wingspan guy.
There you go.
Although
That's the one. Yeah.
I think I looked up Desmond Bain, and Desmond Bain's wingspan isn't as like off as you would think. But I also think he's barrel chested. He's like broad through the shoulders. So his arms can be you can have a decent sized wingspan if you're broad through the shoulders and still have short arms.
Right. Jesus.
So look at you. Look at you. Um, let's see. Do we have anything else to discuss today, Brendan?
Um, I don't know if I do really. I'm having the time of my life out here. Do you have anything specific going on? Any boat activities?
I was out on the boat yesterday. It's been chilly. I don't know what the deal is. It's even like right now, it's like 74 degrees outside. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
we were
no,
we were
nothing too crazy on my end.
okay. Yeah, the water's too cold to get in. I think. I saw a couple people jump in the water yesterday, and I thought they were crazy. Especially if there's a breeze and the water's cold. I'm like, I'm not gonna jump in. Let's see. Do we have any questions that we need to answer? Securing the monk. Oh, that was a point I was going to make too. Is Monty on the hot seat? I don't know if Mike Brown is on the hot seat. I don't think it's going to be all that much time before Monty would be on the hot seat as well. I don't think that Mike Brown is on the hot seat as much as it is they're fighting over dollars and years of a contract extension. So that's one thing that I would point out.
Yeah. And I guess um, when it comes to all the Mike stuff, it seems like that it's not from Monty's perspective that we're really talking about here, right? More ownership.
I'm not sure.
Interesting.
Like again, I think that like it's gonna be united front, right? So that's something that I think I definitely would point out that we're not gonna have like um you know like a whole lot of issues like ownership and management are on the same page. I'd also like it keeps slipping my mind. I was gonna point out that people need to remember too that McNair entered last season as a lame duck general manager, and that in February he got his extension. And to me, that was weird. It was either January or February he got his extension. I thought that to me was very strange because you are allowing a general manager to walk into trade season where he very well could have traded away your future, and he didn't have a contract pass last year, pass last season, And I would say that it's much more commonplace for a front office personnel to go into a season as a lame duck as opposed to a head coach. Head coaches, because of the way they get fired midseason all the time, general managers get let go all the time as well, but it's typically during the offseason. Coaches get fired midseason. I mean, again, I don't know how many times I've seen that in my time here in Sacramento. Westfall, Malone. Um, you can throw Ty
Walton.
Corbin in that. What was that?
Walton.
Yeah, Walton. So at least 4 times I've seen that. Anyway, it's you don't want. I don't think this is a situation you want to go into. It just doesn't. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I
No,
did want to
honestly,
bring
even
that up.
from my perspective, like it's not something that I want to have to be talking about that much. I don't feel like it needs to be much of a conversation. And I'd imagine that the players feel somewhat similar, that they don't want this to be something that gets talked about a bunch, and be something that's hanging over their heads really the whole season. And on the Monty point, Monty getting extended midseason, you're right. I forgot that had happened. The other weird aspect is like I don't feel like anything was necessarily proved in the season up to that point. In my mind, that's like, okay, let's wait. Let's see. You prove it a little bit. I don't know that necessarily anything was really proven up to that point.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, was it last season or was it the season before where Monty was coming into the season as a lame duck?
Actually, it might have been the year before.
Yeah, when they started winning.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that's something where they're like, well, it worked out in this situation, and I don't think that that's typically what you do with coaches. I just like, I don't know.
Right.
Leezy asks, where will my guy Ron Holland go? I don't know. Holland's going to go somewhere between like 10 and 20. Super athletic. Again, Jonathan Kaminga-esque. Maybe not as much pop, but
Reminds me a little bit of RJ Barrett. Caught him a couple times when he went to Stockton this year. I do think that he's a very fun player, but I can't help but think that these 19-year-old guys just aren't the Kings type. I would love for them to get some like more raw prospect. I could spend a lot of time at Stockton, but I get why maybe that's not the ideal route. Like they are kind of trying to take those next steps sooner rather than later.
mhm.
But to play the other side, when are you going to pick this high again? So, if you're going to take a swing, I could see it making sense, but I can't help but think the previous track record of this front office makes me stay away from thinking that's where they're going to go.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm just going to like any coach could have got us 40 plus wins. I don't know what you're talking about, man, because I covered the team for, again, 14 years. My first 12, no one ever got 40 plus wins. And it's only happened 10 times now in the 39-year history of the Kings where they got to 40 wins. Like, well, where they got 41 wins. I think there was one other season where they finished 40 and 40. No, I don't think
I think
so.
that the Jaeger year, they got 39 and they
39.
almost beat Portland on the last game of the year with a bunch of nobodies. And then Anthony Simons went crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I was there for that. That was a mess.
That was the Scal and Caleb Swanigan year when those guys got traded back and forth a couple times.
Yeah, and also that was Jaeger. I think they scored 84 or 86 in the first half, the Kings did. And
Yeah,
then
that's right.
and then Dave pulled everybody, and Portland played 6 players
Yeah,
and
that's right.
came back and beat them. Yeah. Yeah, so um anyway, yeah, it's a little crazy. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about like players. I mean, about coaches going into a final season like this, and how anyone could have coached his team to 40 plus wins. I mean, did anyone realize that like Mike Brown had an 18 game improvement in wins from the year before he got there until the year he got there? Now, it's not really fair because it was, of course, it was a 72 game season, I believe, the year before. But they were on pace to win like 33, 34 games. They won 30. And I don't even know if it's 33, 34. I'd say like they're on pace to probably win 32 or 33. So even if it was a 15 to 16 game improvement, that's stunning. that's like absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Um,
I just keep going back to like, what else do you need to see? I feel like Mike's done everything that he could with what's in front of him. I feel like the players have embraced him. And to be honest, that's really enough for me. Like, let it roll for a little while longer, at least. It would get, I just hope this doesn't end up being messy. Like, like I said, I don't want to be talking about it all year. I imagine the players don't want it hanging over them, Mike, all of the above. Just get this handled. Try to have a normal year.
I totally agree. I totally avoid the drama. Let's see. Leezy asks, any chance Kings make a crazy move to get Cat? I don't think Cats can be on the block. They literally are in the Western Conference Finals. I don't think that that's going to happen. And I don't know his injury history. Maybe he could play well next to Sabonis, but I don't know.
Yeah, they seem to have a weird financial situation, but I'd imagine making it Western Conference Finals probably helps that a little bit. Also, their ownership thing that's one of the weirdest things going on in sports. When you have both owners, like your apparent future one and the current, I guess. I don't even know the proper wording for this at the current point, but super weird to see A-Rod there courtside dapping guys up with all this weird stuff going on. It feels very Kangs.
Yeah, they're well above the second apron for next year. So the second well, I don't know if well. I think the second apron is 188 million. It's 17.5 million over the luxury tax, so 188.5 million, something like that. And they're right on the cusp of being over the second apron. If you're over the second apron, it freezes your 2032 first round pick. So you can't trade it at all. And I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know if eventually they take it from you or not, but it certainly freezes it and it limits what you can do going forward. And you can only sign minimum scale contracts. You have no mid level, you have no biannual, you have nothing. And any trade that you make has to be dollar for dollar. It cannot be taking back any more money at all. Like you don't get like the 125% or double player salary or, whatever, like all of the 10 plus million that you cannot take back any more salary than is coming in. Like, so they're right there in that situation. And that's not great.
Yeah, we'll see what they end up doing. I will say real quick, credit to Cat. Cat gets a lot of shit, and I think that some of that is deserved at times. But I feel like he's really embraced the defensive end, and he's playing hard. I've questioned even a little bit of what level of, I guess it's kind of cliche, like winning player he necessarily is. But I think that he's bought into all those little details, and I feel like he's playing differently right now than I've seen before, at least.
Yeah, a big shout out to Chris Finch, who's out there like hiding on the second row because he popped his patella tendon when Mike Connolly ran into him in the first round, and a huge shout out to Micah Nori, who was a Kings assistant, a super good dude and super funny. He's been like sort of a live wire all year long. Anytime they do like the in game interviews, he's just been hilarious and I think that's like they've done a really good job of getting the team to this point. Benjamin brings up make a play for Mikal Bridges. That might be more possible now than it was like last week because we're hearing that their owner's saying that they might start over, but maybe I'm wrong.
He's the type of guy that makes sense. We're talking about ideal role pieces that kind of just fill their spot. Also can kind of get you a bucket sometimes. In the length and athleticism, he might be the picture perfect definition. I think he does everything, 3 levels. I mean, that's as good as it gets, but that's going to cost you a pretty penny for sure. And in all these deals, I keep coming back to like, there's not a star piece player wise. I feel like a lot of teams are going to offer a really solid young player and a handful of picks. And if Keegan's not in that deal, I struggle to think of a way that the Kings have the best offer there. Even if they can make something respectable, I don't think that it necessarily would be the best thing on the table for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting if Mikal Bridges if he does come up. First of all, he doesn't make any money. Which is crazy. He makes like 22 million and 24 million, something like that over the next 2 years. So you definitely can like somehow go out and get him financially. That wouldn't even take take very much to go out and get him. Um, It just depends on what Brooklyn's looking for. Clearly, it's going to be a lot of draft picks if they're starting over. So I also think he is like I think it's probably between him and Brandon Ingram of who's a better fit. And I would say he's a better defender than Brandon Ingram. Ingram's not only a better scorer, but a better creator. Averages like, over 5.5 assists a game. And I think that the thing with McHale's number one, he's got 2 years on his deal versus 1 year for Brandon Ingram. And then the other thing I would bring up with him is that he plays nonstop. Like very seldom does he miss games. And that's not something you can say for Brandon Ingram.
I would take McHale so quickly between the two. I think that like the defense he brings, getting to put a lengthy guy like that on perimeter creators is something that the Kings just haven't really had, unless we're talking about KZ Okpala or Mo Harkless. And like they try to do it with Keegan Murray a bit. Sometimes it works. But I think McHale is between the two. I'm easily a Mikal Bridges guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very, very good player, Mikal Bridges. And so I just don't know that there's a way to get him. It's possible. He did average 26 points a game after he got traded to Brooklyn. But we're literally talking about it. His first year, 82 games. The second year, he missed 9 games. He played 72 in this 72 game season. Oh no, that year that he played 73 and missed 9 games, he didn't miss 9 games. That was a 72 game season. Somehow he played 73. 82. He also played 83 games and then 82 last year. So from my math, not only has he never missed a game, but he's actually played 2 more games than any other person like during that stretch. So that is
Not bad.
yeah. And I like he's a much like someone compares him Brian compares him to PJ Washington. He's a much better player than PJ Washington. He's a much better defender. He's a much better scorer overall. Yeah. And again, I like PJ Washington and hat tip to PJ Washington for being in like primo shape after the trade. Like he's done a really good job of getting himself in great shape.
For sure. Yeah, definitely a difference between the two, though. Like PJ is just a really good role player, and there's no hate. Like I was just talking about the importance of those guys. I think
Mhm.
Mikal is a little bit more fringe star, though.
Yeah. No, I think so too. Yeah, that's a tough one, man. I think because he doesn't miss games, Mikal Bridges would have to be like if you were going to somehow choose between those two. He's also they're either way they're the perfect fit. If you could have either one of those guys next to Keegan Murray, that would be tremendous. Like I think the Kings would be like the switchability of those two would be pretty amazing. So, um, and then I hope no one is bringing up the other bridges because I don't want to touch
Yeah,
the other
God, no.
bridges.
Which I
We
will say real quick, when ownership, if there's a sense where ownership or just decision makers are getting pressured, I think that's how weird things like that happen, where there's some desperation, you know? And I just hope we don't get to a point where people feel pressured to do something that maybe they don't even feel great about, like in my mind, other bridges. Like just
okay.
stay away.
Yeah, I'm of that thought too. The other desperate move to me would be Zach Levine. I don't think anyone can actually, like Zach is a perfectly fine scorer and creator. He just can't stay healthy at all. Leezy asked thoughts on Doug Christie coaching the summer league team. I think it's a really good move for Doug. I think coaching the summer league team is it like feeling the responsibility of having the team yourself, like of having to like worry about everything that goes into being a head coach, even though it's for like a 2 week period. I still think it's a really, really, really good experience, and also relying on those around you and feeling that. I mean, it's a big deal. Um, I don't know. Okay, Brennan, we got to get you back out to the lake. I think I have to go for a walk. My wife is hitting me up to go for a walk, which is perfectly fine. That's my get in shape for summer.
Taking
Do
the
you have any?
dogs out.
No, we don't take the dogs with us because we walk fast and they get distracted. And yeah, so we just go, go, go. But yeah, I've been walking 3 to 4 miles a day every day for the last week and a half.
Oh,
So
there you go.
it's good. I'm a little sore. Gotta be honest.
No, it's a good thing.
Um, yeah, no, it's definitely a good thing. Do you have any final thoughts there, Rendon?
Nothing crazy. Just missing Sean. I hope he misses us too. And yeah, I don't really have anything. I'm excited to get back out on the lake. Yeah, this had to be a little bit of an earlier morning show because I am enjoying my time out on the lake. So I appreciate you being flexible with me on timing wise and everybody hopping in here. But yeah, everybody enjoy their Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, thanks for everybody showing up on Memorial Day. I'm glad we were able to get a show in and to have it coincide kind of where the insiders would be. There's no D'Lo and Casey today on ESPN 1320. No insiders on ESPN 1320. We had the weekend off, which is really, really, really nice. Real quickly, Jim Garfunkel. If they bring in a replacement for Jordy, it'll be like a lower level coach. They've already promoted Luke Laux to the front of the bench. And they'll probably bring in like one or two assistant slash player development coaches for the guys that they have lost. Yeah. Anyway, Benjamin's right. The ladies are going crazy for Brenden. He's rocking out with
Not true.
the gun show over here. The gun show over here.
I try
So
to be
good.
authentic. All right. I debated putting myself together, but this is how
There
we're
you go.
living. So this is how we're potting.
That's right. Okay, well, thanks for tuning into the KINGSBEAT podcast. We are, of course, a Blue Wire podcast brought to you by Prize Picks. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Sean will be back. So for Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast, I am James Hamm, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. See you soon.